All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Intergovernmental Relations Committee meeting conducted by the Board of County Commissioners. My name is Mark Jarrell. Have the pleasure of chairing this particular committee. Want to say greetings. Today is kind of a historic day plus a really important day for this committee. We'll be going through our legislative agenda, number one. Number two, we're also at this point live streaming out to the community. So everybody who's joining us via Zoom, thank you and welcome. If you cannot hear us or if you have comments, please utilize the chat function and we'll be responsive. I want to take this opportunity to introduce my colleagues and members of this committee. We'll start with District 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Laura Meyer. I represent District 5.
District 6.
Good afternoon. I'm Susan Rodriguez McDowell, elected by the people of District 6.
And in just 1 second, we will introduce everyone who is in the room with us. We do have our Vice Chair of the School Board and would love for her to introduce herself.
Good afternoon, Stephanie Sneed, Vice Chair, Board of Education, District 4.
Thank you. And Starla, if you will introduce staff, and then we will have those that are in the room introduce themselves as well.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Starla Tanner, Intergovernmental Affairs Manager. Happy to turn the mic over for introductions to our DCM and to our other colleagues in the room.
Good afternoon, Derek Ramos, Deputy County Manager and Chief of Staff.
Good afternoon, Carly Godfrey, Senior Assistant to the County Manager.
And we also have our wonderful technical staff. Michael Hedgepath, he's around here making sure that all of our technology in this new Zoom approach works. So we definitely want to acknowledge him as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely.
Oh, I'm sorry. And Rebecca, I'm sorry. I put my glasses back on.
Rebecca Carter, Public Information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tony, you want to introduce yourself?
Tony Foreman.
Good afternoon. I'm oh, thank you. Forgot about. Good afternoon, Rodney Moore, former state representative representing District 99 from 2011 to 2019. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. And again, to those of you that are joining us via Zoom, I do see a staff member, Erin Stanforth, who's also joining us. So thank you, Erin, for joining us as well. So I want to dive right into today's committee meeting. We will be going through our legislative agenda. I do want to thank Starla and staff for teeing this up for the committee purposes. Our job is going to be to tweak, make adjustments, or just confirm what we have so that we can bring this to our colleagues and hopefully adopt an agenda that we all agree on. One of the things having Vice Chair Sneed here is really important. She chairs the, what do you call that? What do you call your side? IRC? She chairs the IRC for the school board. Those of us that have been working in this space really know how important it is for us to stay aligned as much as we can, and to have her here, and certainly we'll look forward to her comments. I would like to say that Commissioner Leek is a part of this committee and she's unable to join us today due to some health related issues. So we're keeping her in our thoughts and prayers as well. We also have talked to our city counterparts to really try to, again, see where we should be taking an intergovernmental approach to pushing the agenda and the needs for the residents of Mecklenburg County. I think that's really, really important for us to make sure that we keep that first and foremost in our minds. But obviously from a county perspective, we know that we have a specific scope of authority that's really important for us to maintain and move forward with respect to that. So with that being said, the final thing that I would like to do with respect to things that are happening throughout the nation and what we have witnessed in Memphis. And then I also had the opportunity to hear about a tragedy that happened to a councilwoman in New Jersey who was tragically killed at her home. I would like to take this opportunity to take 30 seconds of silence with respect to that. And so I just ask us all to take 30 seconds at this point. Thank you. So at this time, we'll turn it over to Starla Tanner, who's our Intergovernmental Affairs Manager.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to everyone here, commissioners, and certainly our leadership on the executive team and colleagues and our community folks. And I too am excited that we are increasing our engagement with having folks be able to tune in virtually, not because of a pandemic, but to continue access. So I am presenting the proposed legislative agenda presentation. I think Carly is going to bring up the slide deck for us. And as we get started, let's see if I can make sure I'm going the right way with there we go. So I'll start by saying a few years ago, we combined our state and federal items. That is continuing in the proposed agenda to you today, because we found that many of the issues align with both levels of government, with both levels of our delegation. For example, health and human service issues are often funded partially by the state or partially by the federal government, or funded by the federal government, and of course administered by the state and then by the county. And in talking to staff and actual delegation members, it was helpful for them to have a broad understanding, the overall understanding of our initiatives and what our priorities were. And so this agenda that you have today continues to keep both of those agendas together. It also continues to start, and we talked about this in our last meeting, with our guiding legislative principles. That's certainly the charge the board gives to us as staff, and that we then share with our delegation. There are 5 legislative guiding principles. The first one being to support legislation that grants the county greater flexibility. And then, of course, legislation that provides funding to counties. We oppose or encourage them to oppose legislation that removes authority from counties. And then we encourage our delegation members and stakeholders to oppose legislation that creates unfunded mandates, directly or indirectly shifting costs to the county. This past year, or recently, we added a 5th guiding principle to support equity and inclusion efforts, aligning with that priority for the county. Those are still the proposed legislative principles for this agenda. The considerations, and Mr. Chairman, you talked about this at the elected level of how we're happy to have our school board representation here. At the staff level, we also collaborate and definitely keep lines of communication open on things that are the priorities of our respective boards. And so these are some of the considerations that went into the legislative agenda that you'll hear this afternoon. Certainly, first and foremost, the board priorities and the approved programs that we have in place. I was paying attention every month throughout the retreat and made a few edits as you all were discussing your priorities, and the chair and I went over those just briefly yesterday to make sure that I was in alignment with the discussion. Committee feedback, some of the comments from our last meeting, specifically, actually, I'll be very transparent around education. I tweaked that language a little even more, taking that feedback into perspective. And then certainly our departments were all given an opportunity to make recommendations, because they are our subject matter experts. They are the people in the community. They are the people working with other government agencies and actually applying statutory authority as services. So they were allowed to make recommendations as well, or invited to. And then, of course, the collaborative advocacy opportunities. That's kind of been the theme of your chairmanship. We've taken that into perspective as well. We are also continuing the bucket approach. We talked about the 2022 buckets the last session. This agenda has 3 buckets: education, health and human services, and community and environment. Of course, also taking in perspective those considerations that I mentioned before. So we'll start with education. There are 3 main items under the education priority. The first being to support eliminating the use of the county tiered system that's used for economic development projects, to not use that for education funding. Right now, Mecklenburg County and many of our surrounding counties are tier 3 And just to give you, I'm not an economic development person, but I can share that the tiers are based on average unemployment rate. You all probably know this, median household income, the percentage of growth in population, adjusted property tax rate. So economic development, not related to education. And so this is a conversation that is not a new one, to not take that criteria and use it for how you fund education. The second one is to support fully funding the Leandro case court-ordered comprehensive remedial plan without supplanting existing funding measures. So this is similar to the language that we had before, but it adds in the request to not supplant the funds. For example, a few years ago, additional federal funding was given for block grant funding for early childhood to eliminate the slots. So here's an example, made up numbers completely, but if you have $5 million already in the budget for an item, the federal government increases that by $1,000. If the state takes away their 1,000, so it stays at 5 million, then you've supplanted the federal funding that's supposed to actually add funds to the program. So in this particular situation, we've added the language to say that we support continually funding or continue to fund the comprehensive or start funding the comprehensive remedial plan, but don't supplant money that is given towards education with state once the federal government gives it to us. The third item, support raising the income eligibility thresholds for reimbursement rates for the NC Pre-K program to align with changes in wages, labor force demands, and cost of living. So this is really a multi-pronged approach that brings in our business stakeholders, brings in our childcare community that are providers, and brings in the parents. This language is to really address all three ends of this, to acknowledge the fact that wages are getting higher, so the thresholds should be changed, and that employers have to pay the workers more, and also that businesses have labor demands that are dependent on their employees having access to affordable childcare. So those are our three childcare or education items. Mr. Chair, I can go through all three and then we can take questions at the end, or would you like to stop at each target?
Let's go through the entire presentation and take questions at the end.
And I do want to add, and I left this out, that, and you all probably know this, that the eligibility threshold, the eligibility rate is $52,500 for a family of 4. So that is the current threshold that is across the state, that we support raising that threshold. So under Health and Human Services, the next target, we of course are continuing our request for support of Medicaid expansion and operational flexibility for public assistance programs. This has also been an issue that has found additional support with our stakeholders, including the Charlotte Business Alliance continues to lead in the business effort for our state to support Medicaid expansion. Did I do that, Carly, or did you do that?
That's me.
That's you? Okay.
Line.
We're going to ask everyone that's online if you can mute, please. Thank you, Carly.
Okay. Well, I do know that you all have the PowerPoint in front of you, and I know Carly is going to bring that back on screen, and we'll continue with the Health and Human Services items. We were mentioning Medicaid expansion. The second one is to support funding and policies that address housing security, such as access to affordable housing, examining the impact of investor-owned properties, and increasing the Homestead Act threshold to support older adults aging in place. This is another item that we've worked on in previous sessions and helping our seniors age in place. And it also captures the work that the board and the manager that is being done around access to affordable housing and the research and the funding that you've put behind looking at the impact of investor or corporate owned properties. The second one says to support immigration policies that address needs of immigrant families, as well as strengthen our economy and workforce. At your retreat and at a previous board meeting, you heard County Manager Diorio talk about Title 42 and the possible changes with immigration policies and the preparations that we're taking with different stakeholders in the community in a proactive, collaborative perspective. The fourth item under Health and Human Services, support funding and policies addressing increased access to care, including primary and behavioral care, early childhood development, and support for federally qualified health centers. Again, very specifically, a couple of items from the retreat. Thank you so much, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Our next area, the third one and final area, is kind of a combination. I'll say that previously this was titled Environment and I think public safety, but to capture kind of our services as a county and the things that we've been advocating about and the board has been moving towards, these are the items you see here under community and environment. The first one is to support funding and policies that promote attracting and retaining a talented workforce and increase workforce development opportunities. The second, advocate for policies and increase resources that assist initiatives related to reducing community violence and increasing public safety. As you know, public health is leading with a lot of other community stakeholders' efforts related to community violence. So this aligns with the board's priority in that area. The third, support funding and policies addressing residential orphan roads in unincorporated areas. This is an item that has been on our legislative agenda before. I think there may be an opportunity. There are other counties that have expressed interest. I think Chairman Dunlap mentioned that in some of his comments previously, that we may be able to seek state or federal support to address this. The last item, support funding and policies tackling needs related to environmental stewardship, water and air quality, environmental justice, infrastructure, and broadband access. That is pretty much a catch-all bucket because there are so many things that fall under the environment and community, and in an effort to kind of have our charge and make it a priority to our stakeholders, it's there so we can point to that and say this is the specific or the broad issue or priority that we have, and then that leads us into the discussion about whatever specific bill or regulatory opportunity we may have in that particular area. So those are the broad three categories and some of the priorities, and some of them not as broad, such as orphan roads and some of our other items that we have. But in addition to the legislative agenda, we of course have a legislative engagement strategy and how we then take our next steps with this agenda. And a lot of it starts with maintaining the proactive and responsive and relationship with our delegation members, regulatory agencies, and our stakeholders that have these items as their priorities, or maybe they're not their priorities, and we need to help them see what this priority means and what our position and the impact of proposed legislation may be. So some of the things that you all do and that we do together and you allow us to do, we host our annual delegation breakfast. We have a tentative date that's been proposed that's held on your calendars for later on this month. We're firming that up. I expect it'll be at the Valerie C. Woodard Community Room. That's the plan for now. We are inviting our court officials again, our delegation members. We've been virtual for the last few years and we've had 90%, almost 100% participation. Unfortunately, we're probably not going to have that this time in person, but we'll be glad to have a dialogue one-on-one with our state legislative delegation members. The NACO Legislative Conference, National Association of County Officials. I think everyone here, all three of you, will be attending that. You're on steering committees, you've seen the resolutions. I'll chat with you about some of those as we get a little closer. And so that's a great way to have a conversation about federal policies. Then we have the State County Commissioners Association Assembly Day. That date has not been announced yet, but that's also another great way to engage with our legislative strategy with the assistance of other counties from around the state. And then in addition to that, delegation and regulatory agency meetings, we do that ongoing. Now that we're a little more person to person, I anticipate as part of my work plan for you all is to have those midterm conversations at the state and federal level that we'll be working on as time proceeds, especially since this is a long legislative session. So we expect they'll be there for a while. So hopefully we'll have a chance to give our input on legislation and provide information to our members and their staff. Boards and commissions membership. I think all three of you can raise your hand as well as many of our staff members. Rebecca herself was was the president of the National Association of County Public Information Officials. And so we all serve, continue to engage on policies and issues through membership, either staff and certainly the board, and how you all really provide the leadership and represent our interest as well. And then the district events that I know that you all carry on in your districts. Those are all so important in our overall legislative strategy. So our timeline, today, of course, you are considering the proposed legislative agenda and making tweaks or additions or giving comments. And then upon your approval, if that's received today on February 8th, the full board will hear your recommended legislative agenda. And then we will have that in hand to go to NACO. I think I've shared that because Congress will be out, we don't have delegation meetings scheduled, but you'll still be armed with Mecklenburg County's priority list for those conversations in the steering committee meetings about policy agenda items in this interim for Congress. Our legislative breakfast, as you see, is tentatively scheduled for February 24th. So as I conclude, I'll also acknowledge that you all allow me to oversee 2 sets of contract lobbyists. They are extremely helpful in taking the next steps in this legislative agenda. In Raleigh, we have Rob LeMay and Associates. Rob LeMay and Lorian Harris are on the ground for us there. In Washington, D.C., we have Smith Dawson Andrews. You all met Brett Garrison and his team. Just want to shout out, second time in a row, they brought home an earmark for us from Congresswoman Adams of $1 million. They are certainly doing their job and do a great job providing us with research as well as grant opportunities to pursue. And they look forward to having us in DC. We may be able to meet with them for breakfast, maybe while we're there. But if not, the interim meeting that we'll do in the spring, I anticipate proposing that to you all, that we go back to DC in the spring when we can actually get in to see our delegation members. So, Mr. Chairman, that concludes the agenda. I'll go back to each page if that's helpful to each of the bucket items. And I'll actually ask our DCM and Chief of Staff if he has any additional comments before I finish.
Thank you, Starla.
All right. All right. Thank you, Starla, for the presentation and the work. And thank you to everyone who contributed to this document. This is how we're going to do this today. We do have until 2:30. We're going to tee everything up with the committee members first. You guys are going to have a lot of latitude to provide whatever your comments are, your feedback, suggestions, and also any proposed changes. Because of the timeline that Starla put out there, one of the things that I hope we do moving forward, and again, this is just forward thinking, I think it's important for us to have public comment around this. And I would love for committee to give their feedback on what they think about that. That's just a personal thing for me. I think particularly if we're talking about an agenda that impacts the people. We don't have time to do that necessarily, but what I would like to do today, and so everybody who's listening online and that's in the room, I would like you to know that we're going to open up a minute, literally, to allow a little bit of public comment. Questions, you can email questions and we'll provide responses. But if you want to give a general comment when the time comes, we'll give 60 seconds. At 60 seconds, Carly, you will mute the mic. So I want to give everybody as much runway as possible to let you know that we will get in as much, and we do have another agenda item. So I'm going to be managing the time, but the committee members are going to get a lot of latitude to provide their comments and feedback. We also want to hear from our vice chair of the school board. So she'll get some latitude as well. But just so everybody knows and it's fair, I do think it is important for us to take some feedback. So if that makes sense to the committee.
Sounds
Is
good.
that okay? All right, so we'll start with Commissioner Rodriguez-McDowell. When she's done, we will go to Commissioner Meyer, and then we will go to Vice Chair Sneed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first suggestion or question is on slide 8 about the community and environment catch-all bucket. I kind of wonder if we might consider moving the reducing community violence and public safety to the health bucket, as I think that's where it falls in our, sort of work that we do. It falls under our health and human services. Was there a reason for it moving to community bucket?
You're right, Commissioner. The Public Health Department is the lead on that for the county. We slotted it in this bucket because we know that there's a lot of partners that will be involved with public health to make that work happen. That document talks a lot about intergovernmental collaboration to get that work accomplished. So that's why we thought it was maybe fit in that broader bucket, but we understand certainly for the county, the Public Health Department is the point, for that effort. But we could Do you have anything else to add on that?
Only that the public safety part of it does include working with criminal justice services and Sonia Harper's division. And so that putting it under community was a way to kind of align and merge their roles, even though, as you stated, and as Derek stated, the public health department is the lead on community violence, our community violence initiative. So we'll certainly take your preference.
Okay, okay. I mean, I think what I'm realizing is that this is really a tool for our delegation and others that are representing our interests. And so whatever way gives them the most latitude and the most access to, communicating with us. If the county has its own, sort of secret way of doing things, not secret, special way of like, we put this in health, but other people put it over here, whatever. Then I could see why, you would have a separate bucket for that. I have to say that I did wince a little bit on seeing community and environment lumped together, because I don't know if we're just trying to like cut down the number of buckets, if that's the idea, but it seems that environment, should be a pretty big part, of like, it sort of takes away a little bit of the priority if it's kind of lumped in with other things. And so that kind of struck me. And then the first item under education on slide 6, support eliminating use of the county tiered system created for economic programs and education funding. So this is when I was trying to like remember what this is speaking to, but it's about the when we didn't get funding when other communities got funding, even if they had a higher AMI or whatever than we did. Speaking to that.
Yes, ma'am. There have been instances of very specific instances where they said, we'll grant this funding to tier 1 and tier 2 counties because tier 3 counties are rich enough. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but tier
Right.
3 counties have enough funding and they're tier 3 counties.
Right.
And so, but as we know, tier 3 counties have the needs related to the increased population of tier 3 counties and even just as much so, just differently as tier 1 and tier 2. And so we certainly don't want to get into battles or disagreements with our fellow counties, but we'd like to acknowledge that the economic development process and system uses a criteria that's different from a system of how you fund education.
Mhm.
And so I can certainly clarify that language a little bit more if you think I should, but that is, you're right, that is the background of that particular item.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think I really do want to be sensitive to our rural counties because, our state can't thrive unless those counties and their education, their districts also thrive. So I understand how there is a difference. And so I'm not quite sure if the terminology of eliminating it or, I don't know if there's another way, maybe it's already been thought through to that being the best way, but it just kind of caught me a little bit like, I wonder if we want to frame it that way. So.
And I will share that in conversations and dialogue over the years in the General Assembly discussions, it's typically referred to as eliminating or not using. So one of the two, but usually it's a kind of straightforward approach to let's not use economic development tools to fund education. But you're right, there is a sensitivity that's needed as well. But you told me to go. No.
No. I like the bullet point as far as the intention. It's just I'm just a little bit concerned about other counties, and their response. But I really do think the basic point is correct. So.
Would you like us to wordsmith that some?
I don't know. I'd love to hear what other people think. It just struck me as, wondered if it could be problematic, but I could definitely get over that. So it just took me a minute, So that's really for now, those are my biggest things. And then of course, when we get to, I don't know if we're going to speak about the agenda timeline, but the legislative breakfast, February 24th, not good. There's going to be so many leaders that are on this trip, the Tampa trip with CRVA or CRBA. So I think you're going to eliminate a number of people that should be in the room. I, for one, strongly object. So.
Commissioner Meyer.
Thank you very much. Yes, I already texted Starla to tell her that wasn't going to work.
But I see she didn't change the date
No, she
yet,
didn't.
so I figured that you needed a little
I
backup
think her
here.
hands are tied. That was actually one of my questions, was the first point under education. I was going to ask you to explain it, so thank you for that. And maybe if you could put something about understanding the rural counties' needs. I don't know, something, I know you want to keep it short and kind of,
I will say that unofficially, it's a conversation that I've had with some of my education counterparts, and we maybe could ask CMS and their representatives how they would like to phrase that, so that's something we could be aligned with on how we talk about that.
yeah,
Can I just
sure, yeah.
comment on your comment? I think it does matter to the school district, obviously, but I think it really speaks to the county in terms of funding. So I think it's more about our role in funding as opposed to CMS's role in wanting to be advocated for. You
Because
know?
it puts a strain on us because we're having to make up for what we're not getting from the state. So yeah, it makes sense.
Mhm.
So that's all I have. The second thing I want to ask, since the public is listening, can you explain the process so they'll understand what we do? What we do with this, how we present it to our partners, and realistically speaking, what happens?
Well, I thank you, Commissioner, for that comment. The realistic part, I used to give a
Okay.
talk and do the schoolhouse rock. I'm just a bill and tell people that I wish it really did happen like that. But and sometimes I'm still sitting on Capitol Hill. But you're absolutely right. This is a tool, and it's so important for the community to understand what we use it for. And so after this receives, the final version receives board approval, then it is shared with all of the elected officials that represent Mecklenburg County. So whether it's state legislators or members of Congress and the Senate or the House and their staff, we share this with our lobbyist help in DC and in Raleigh to say these are priority areas, not all inclusive, of course, but these are our priority areas for Mecklenburg County. And then we also reach out to stakeholders. We have many of them here today, and we're excited about that, and online that have shared initiatives or priorities as well. And so that the next step is, do we seek bills? You know, we really try and come up with a strategy of how we move some of these items into becoming legislation, or at least having additional awareness, because sometimes it takes several sessions for changes to happen. So we increase awareness by notifying our delegation members. We seek alignment with other stakeholders that may have bills, legislation that they're having introduced. We can ask our delegation members to co-sponsor. We can ask our delegation members to actually sponsor some of these initiatives. For example, the Early Childhood Education Initiative. Tanya Jameson and I met just earlier this morning to talk about that, and there's some statewide collaboration occurring. And so that could be a bill that another member or someone else introduces, or we talk to members
They're all.
to.
Did you know this?
Oh, no.
We need everybody online to please mute.
It came up, what's today, Thursday, like on Tuesday or Monday, and
So those are the next steps. We inform everyone of the priorities, and then we seek ways to move these priorities into at least legislation or a conversation or a hearing. And then hopefully we can increase the advocacy and initiate change. And sometimes that happens in a session. Sometimes you said realistically, sometimes it takes several years, but it just depends on what the item is.
Okay, thank you for that. And I also want to say thank you for putting, primary care in there. And I think all of these really do reflect the board priorities that we just settled on, just at our retreat. So I'm excited about that. I like the language. I agree with Susan Rodriguez McDowell on the watering down of the community and environment, kind of all lumped in together. That's a little concerning. All of those are so important. I don't know if you can make another bullet point, take some out, put some, so anyway, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Meyer. I'm going to go back to Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell, then we'll get some comment from our vice chairs of the school board.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one more thing about the education, the first bullet point on there is, as I sit here and marinate on it, I think I do like where you say that we support eliminating the use of the county tier system that they use for economic development. But I wonder if, in speaking about, sort of wordsmithing, if we could add a clause that comes after that sentence, so it's not just a full stop. That something about considering urban counties and their unique needs, or rural and urban counties and the differences, like finding a different way to speak positively about how the state can impact education through our budgeting limitations and recognition of the differences in counties. So as instead of just saying eliminate it, like some way of recognizing the difference between counties, some sort of language around that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that. One last comment.
Yeah, but we're expecting more from you, man.
Okay, good. All right.
Vice Chair Sneed, be curious to maybe get a little bit of feedback from you.
Thank you so much, Chair. Happy to see that we have some mutual interest in the true spirit of intergovernmental relations, particularly there's definitely some crossover. Obviously, we have similar language in our legislative agenda that we just recently voted on by our board, particularly around elimination of the economic tier systems for funding, and of course to fully fund Leandro without supplanting the funds are definitely in line. We also have some language in about funding, increased funding to make sure that our K-12 families have access to technology and broadband. So would love to see if we could have similar language between our staff, that we are pushing forth the same language in the General Assembly, I think will be helpful. The one thing that we do have on our agenda that I don't necessarily see here that we need some support on is that we are trying to get a nurse in every school. And currently that's not happening. We have, most schools have a nurse like 2 days a week or something like that. We think there are some barriers to that. And one is about the requirements for nursing, that they have to currently be a registered nurse. And we would like some leeway in that. There could be some certified nurses that could be in our schools as well. Would love to see some, companion support from, considering our nurses are county employees, if I'm not mistaken, some language in your legislative agenda that specifically addresses that, so we can have a united front, possibly to have a nurse in every school every day. That's the language that we're pushing. I know that some of our private sector partners are very interested in supporting that effort as well.
Thank you. I think those are great points. And I know that Starlin, Charlie, and Dana have worked tirelessly to try to figure out where we do have alignment, where we have similar language. But I think you point out some great opportunity for this committee to discuss right now. But I would like to give some feedback, unless you had any sort of response or anything. I'll wait.
We have had a few conversations. Our public health director, Dr. Raynard Washington, kind of an informal conversation, certainly with sensitivity to the need of school nurses and the challenges with recruitment and retention. So we are having those conversations. I know from his perspective, and maybe scope of practice issues regarding, just some conversations that would need to take place around changing the certification or the requirements of the nurses or the staff that were fulfilling those roles in schools. So I certainly can't speak for Dr. Washington, but I did want to share, as we've done the theme of this meeting, that there continues to be collaborative conversations about that issue as well.
Okay, thank you for that. So a couple of things, what I've heard from particularly the committee members, first off, was this idea about moving the violence, our lens regarding violence, to the public health bucket. I would say I agree with that, and I appreciate you bringing that up. The other thing that I heard was that environment should be standalone. I agree with that as well. I would just add that I think it needs to be much more robust. And I know we have Aaron Stanforth on the line. and would love to be able to get her, and just to kind of frame this thing up a little bit. When I say much more robust, when we talk about, when you take those elements of water and air quality, you take environmental justice, I'd like to see some language that references protections, right? How these communities of color that have been impacted over time, when we talk about infrastructure from an environment standpoint and what we do at the county, I would love to see some language with respect to alternative modes of transportation and mobility, utilizing our greenways to move people, to fund those, to fund that level of infrastructure from a county perspective, so that it really connects with what our city partners are doing, and also other counties. I think that's really important. I think the broadband access is spot on. That is a major initiative that I think we need to tackle, because that's really tied into economic mobility. But again, with respect to environment, I think it needs to be a little much more meatier with specifics. And I think in general, when I look at what we have here, I really appreciate the framework. I do think that there are some areas where there are more generalities where I would like to see, definitive specifics. I know, Starla, we talked about this, and I understand why certain things do need to be a little more generalized. I mean, I think we've got to have a balance, but I do think that there are areas where, such as the environment, where I think we can be much more specific. And again, having Erin here, I would love to make sure that she is adding her level of expertise as well, as we move forward there. The other thing that I heard was being sensitive to our rural counties. I've heard the chairman mention that as well. And so I'm glad you did mention that. I also heard adding some language around that education section. And I would definitely agree with that in trying to thread that needle. With respect to Vice Chair Sneed, I appreciate you just really teeing up where we have common ground, and then, where there's potential opportunity for us to explore. I think that's really important. Starla, I would really, and Derek, I would really like to see some kind of way that we designate on our legislative agenda, where we can highlight to our colleagues in the community the cross collaboration. So this particular item with respect to education, this sits on the legislative agenda for CMS as well. In some kind, it doesn't have to be, apples for apples, but generally speaking, I think it's important for us to really understand where the legislative items, where we share that goal. So that's kind of my general feedback right now, and I'll circle back to my colleagues to go through any other additional feedback that they may have.
Yeah, so I'm really glad you really jogged something that I was thinking I know that we're trying to keep the language simple, and we're trying to be very sort of bullet pointy. And I get why we want to do that, but I think that I just would love some dialogue around having some of the obvious low-hanging fruit items that are easily digestible to our delegation, sort of readily spelled out, like you just mentioned, some of the things on the environment, well, what do we mean by that? Like, it's so general. Can we put some specific things in there? And just so that they're like, maybe it's like, the general statement, and then there's a few bullet points of low-hanging fruit that if our delegation could pick up on and be like, oh, well, I could see a connection here, draw some dots here. I just wonder, our approach trying to be minimalistic is serving us well. That's the question.
And thank you, Commissioner, for that comment. It is approach that I was directed to take previously by the board. So,
Yeah. No, I think, I think I remember
we had
that.
a lot-
But I'm not sure if it's serving us well. Like, we make changes and we go, is this working or is it not working? Or, could we tweak it, so they just offer that.
I don't, in response, it hasn't hurt us because, because we don't know what bills will be. Sometimes we have some insight of legislation is going to be introduced, but because we often don't, that broadness does not hurt us. It helps us just as much as the specifics. So as you said, it's a good reflection to take time to make on whether or not the broader or more narrow approach, or either creating a blend of the two, as you just stated, we can try that perspective as well. But it has not hurt us. I haven't gotten that feedback from our lobbyists or from our delegation members.
Okay, well, that's great. I think, when I listen to or I read things that sort of, the General Assembly is doing, and I see some of the bills that they come up with, some of them are just so specific, and they're like, oftentimes trying to fix a problem that isn't there or whatever, but they are using specific language, and I'm thinking, maybe that is an approach that we could consider is, packing a punch with some certain language around certain things. And then also having the general items as well. Just throwing it out there. I don't know how the rest of our board would feel about that, but I think
But I think, I think it's important for us to make a recommendation, right? I mean, we're the ones that get the first look at this. And so, certainly appreciate the work that everybody did on this. And to Starla's point, I think we did direct her to kind of make it, minimize it to a large extent. But when you're looking at it, I don't know how we could really tie a win. I guess you could tie wins to more generalized focuses. But I mean, when there are specific critical needs that we have, how do we outline those and make sure that they're teed up so that our lobbyists, we know that they're going after these specific needs, funding for X, funding for Y, funding for Z. So I'm just trying to figure that out.
Mr. Chairman, if I could give you an example.
Sure.
It's a timeless, not necessarily a timely example because the bill was just reintroduced, but there was we have had access to housing as an item. And so we didn't anticipate a bill being introduced in a previous session that would have limited the rights of tenants in short-term hotels or short-term lease stays. And that broad definition, we couldn't have anticipated that being an issue that was an access to housing, the limiting of rights. We were able, under this broad approach, that I had the charge to be able to work on that and really work on fighting that bill or that proposal, and we were successful in doing that. So it was a broad approach, but it was a win for us in preventing those rights actually being taken away. And so, as you said, it's a dual approach of a narrow focus and knowing and having an understanding of what priorities the board directs us to have, and the spirit behind those directions, and then checking back in with you all, of course, if there's, which you all were. I mean, everybody made calls, the chair made calls, it was all hands on deck. And so that does happen during the session that we can't always anticipate. So the broad approach helps there, but that's not to say that there aren't some narrow things, like very specifically, we support expansion of Medicaid, or the Homestead Exemption Act, or we need money for orphan roads. I mean, those are some very specific areas that you've asked that we focus on.
That's right. Commissioner Meyer.
Thank you. So under the Health and Human Services, you have good wording, I think, using the word such as, and you give examples. The support funding and policies addressing increased access to care, including. So using those words when it comes to environmental justice, for example, environmental justice such as, to be a little more specific. And plus, well, environmental justice and stewardship, environmental stewardship, I think need to be a little more narrow. Using words such as or including. Does that make sense?
It does.
And that's what I'm wondering if we can.
I mean, we have some examples like
Okay.
the stormwater some of the stormwater regulations that have been put in place that we've certainly had in our broader legislative agenda language. And I know that are issues that we expect to be presented to the legislature again this year. And so the question is, in looking at our time frame, and I'm trying to wordsmith some of the things you all have been saying, because and the time frame is one for you all to approve or change. But in keeping with our time frame, I would need to make some changes now to present to you all to consider. And you can also make changes, of course, in the full meeting as well. But certainly, I hope the committee would have looked through everything and presented its changes and recommendations. So
That's it. All right. Before we go any further, what I'd like to do is, if the committee doesn't mind, let's give the public that would like to 60 seconds for any general comments. Again, questions need to be emailed or placed in the chat for us to respond. But if you have some just general thoughts within 60 seconds, we'll be timing folks. And then you will be muted at that time so that we can make sure that we get to everyone, plus get to our next agenda item. So I hope that's fair. We're going to start with folks that are online. I will call you out, ask you to unmute. You've got 60 seconds to give us comment. And I'm just going to go in the order that I see folks. First one is Lucille Puckett.
No comment.
Thank you. You can raise your hand if you would like to comment. Thank you, Commissioner Rodriguez. John.
Thank you. So one thing I really want to stress as a private citizen is I'm looking forward to hearing more about the sustainability efforts and especially the greenway expansions. I know that we're dealing with a lot as a county and especially here in Charlotte in terms of trying to navigate throughout the area. But the one thing I continually see that Mecklenburg County gets right is its greenways program and expansion. So that's something I really want to encourage. It's not just a park amenity. A lot of people I know, especially here in East Charlotte, use it as a means of transportation, where otherwise they might not be able to do so safely. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you. Chris Dennis.
Hello, all. Thanks for including us in this. And I ditto what John said about East Charlotte and greenways and active transportation. And one of the things that I think would be the best to figure out in this legislative way is where we can break down silos, where efficient government loses momentum and process because there are silos put up where language doesn't speak to each other, or budget planning sessions don't speak to each other, or activities on the ground don't speak to each other. And the best way for us to help you is to have our stakeholders be your voice with the legislators to mimic and take the word forward with understanding. So help us help you do your job better for what you want. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I don't see any other hands online. We do have a comment from Nimish. I'll get to that in a second. I'm going to go to the room and go with former Rep Rodney Moore. Let me get you a microphone.
Well, I would just quickly like to acknowledge the fact that this has been a great meeting. There's some good suggestions, some good ideas. Starla's done a great job, but I would want to advocate more looking into your court system, because we have an issue because of COVID. We have a lot of backlog of cases, and it's a strain on the DA and your court system. And you guys have some type of funding responsibility. And so I would advocate for that. And also I would advocate continuing for the decriminalization of marijuana in small doses, because those things really gum up your court system, and they're very minor offenses, and we need to move on and help our DA out. So that would be my observation of your agenda.
Thank you for those. We'll go with Tony Foreman.
Thank you. I want to thank you for inviting me to this meeting. I think it's a very productive meeting. I like what I see. I like what's happening in Charlotte. And I think that we could collaboratively, we could do a whole lot more, especially with the intergovernmental agenda. With the education and having Vice Chair Sneed here and having the commissioners here. And I wish the people from the Parks Department were here. I think that when we're talking, I heard the mention of crime, and a lot of the crime that's going on in Charlotte has to do with our youngsters. I don't know what his title is, from the Parks Department, stated that he had some facilities that were they weren't being used properly. And I've spoken to Vice Chair Sneed and several other individuals about this, and I think that we need to somehow find a collaboration where we could talk with Parks Department. Mr. Moore and I would be more than glad to talk to the legislators to see what we could do to use those facilities for our youngsters, to give them a safe place to go. And this is wonderful. I like it. And I think with the environmental piece, that's a broad topic, and it does need some specificity. But except for that, I'm really I'm impressed.
Thank you. Thank you. Tanya, do you want to add anything? You coming? No, I got you. All right, I don't see any other hands. Can you read Nimish's comments for me?
You want me to? I
Yeah, can somebody read that?
Go ahead. You want me to read them? Can you read them?
Go ahead, Starla, can you read it, or Carly, can you read it?
I
You're
can
right
read
there.
it since I
Thank
know
you.
it's far for all of you.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, thank you.
It says, Namaste to all. Public health and safety should focus on children and seniors with special approach because many times they are voiceless, not at the decision-making table. Refugees, immigrants, and minorities, the RIM communities, have lack of representing themselves, but elected officials have been very open and supportive. It needs to be reflected meaningfully in staff by not to push procedures and processes on shoulders of community instead of walking as team and educate them to learn with better outcomes.
Thank you for that, Nimish, thank you. I'm gonna go to Vice Chair Sneed again, so you can add any additional comments.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Thank you. Yes, Darla.
Mr. Chairman, can we have just maybe a 5-minute recess? I'm trying to rework some of your language to present it to you all to consider.
Can we certainly
Or
can.
you can keep going.
No,
Either
no.
one,
We
but-
can certainly have a recess, but I would like to see if Commissioner Meyer or Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell had any reaction to what they heard in that way, so that you can incorporate that when we go to the recess.
Yeah, I would love to echo what Mr. Moore said about the court system. I think that is a miss for us to not have that on our legislative agenda. I think it's a huge piece of what's happening in our community. And for us to not be advocating especially for funding from the state. I don't know about, I don't know as much about the federal part, but I do know that our state is severely underfunding our court system. So somehow if we can talk about that, and I hate to spring a new thing on, but it just seems like a really big kind of a miss on our part. So I appreciate you bringing that suggestion up, and the decriminalizing marijuana, but that's more of a low hanging fruit or like a specific item. So we have to back to the general versus the specific.
Thanks, Rep. Commissioner Meyer?
I lend my support also to the court system. I don't know if you can, we did talk about this in the last meeting, and that reminded me is this, underfunding of the sheriff's department and their lack of staffing. And I don't know if that is a state, if that's state, or is that just strictly county, but isn't it state as well?
To be clear, are you saying, is it the state's responsibility to fund anything specific to the sheriff's office? Well, I think the issue that the sheriff's office has found is just being able for us to have the staff necessary for them to be able to accept the number of inmates that they have, particularly to take care of the federal population that they receive. And so we've been trying to ensure that they have the staffing and the salary and support mechanisms in place to staff up to be able to manage the inmates that they that they have, particularly with the federal population. So we, on the county side, has been working to support them through funding and other efforts to ensure that they're fully staffed.
But not through the state. That's a county function.
Correct. And staffing the sheriffs, yes.
Okay.
Okay, and so just my final comments before we take a recess is going to be, one, I'd like to go back to CMS for a second. I like the specificity around the nurses in every school. I think that's really important. And I'd like for us to consider that as a committee. The second thing I'd like us to consider is what former Rep. Moore said, and Commissioner Rodriguez-McDowell with respect to our courts and funding, additional funding and providing that level of support. And then the third thing is I support making, moving our community violence under public health. And then the environment being a standalone, making it more robust to really talk about specifics with respect to funding our part of what I consider to be, and this is not a good word to use on our side of the house, but infrastructure with our greenway access, how we're using that as alternative modes of transportation, parks, open space, really taking some of the language from the Environmental Leadership Action Plan and really incorporating that into our legislative agenda. So I am advocating for specifics there.
Yeah.
So those are the suggestions that I would like for us to either solve to or be able to tee up with more robust language, including what you said.
You mentioned Aaron. Do you want to ask her specifically?
Yeah, we can. Do we want to? Yeah, Commissioner Meyer just said, Aaron, we see you on the line. Do you have any comments around the environment?
I'm gonna, for the sake of time, work with Starla to kind of wordsmith and get back to you all.
Okay, perfect. So at this point, what we'll do is, at the suggestion of staff, we'll take a 5-minute recess. We will reconvene. Let's act like it's 2:02. We'll reconvene at 2:07. Thank you.
with schools. Like, for example, like I think we need to look to the future, right? So if we're talking about new high schools that are being built or elementary schools that are being built, you know, do we have social service representative located there? Like, do they have a special office so that they can help families that, you know, are starting their children into the school system and actually be on site at a school? This is something that I first heard about when I was at NACO last year. And it's something that I really wanted to look at for us as we run out of space, as we see how much money it costs, $200 million to build a CRC, $130 million to build a high school. You know, what if we started partnering to where, you know, we could share space for our social services and YFS and that type of thing. So that's something that I would love to sort of tee up conversations about. I think it would take a long time to sort of implement something around that, but to begin conversations or just kicking it around as an idea, I would really appreciate that. So, and I think that just also leads to the court part where I know that Judge Elizabeth Trosh has wanted to collaborate and wanted to bring things to us where we can work better with our courts. And so having some maybe guests, having guests from there, you know, having her specifically and maybe others meet with us would be a great thing for, I'd love to see.
Yeah, please.
Working with the city on, as they continue to develop the city, how do we preserve our green spaces? We're not, and I know that it's supposed to be in place, and I know Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell and I and Commissioner Powell and Julie Eisel and Dimple, we all met once.
Mhm.
So it would be nice if we could get on board with each other on how to plan for the green spaces while they're developing so much.
Yeah, I think you're both spot on, and thank you for those recommendations. I think, again, what you're speaking to is real policy. And that's, you know, what we've been talking about for years, right? We're talking about policy to provide a positive impact. So what I heard was, just to make sure, we were talked about the McKinney-Vento transportation issue was what Starla was teeing up, because we had that conversation, but you talked about kind of looping in that conversation, DSS, foster children, and all of those, you know, really are most vulnerable.
Right.
And I think that could be essentially one sort of conversation potentially. The community violence piece is really, really important to bring our partners to the table, not only just as elected, but also community stakeholders there, like Starla said. School bonds, spot on. I think this is the right space to have certain conversations with our colleagues to gain a better understanding around, you know, what their thoughts are, what their needs are, and for us to take that in as information. The other thing was this idea about the shared space. You know, Braxton and I have had conversations for years about, you know, we have these huge buildings that are occupied from 8 to 5 or whatever that time frame is, but to 2/3 of any given day, they're unoccupied. Are we really using them to their highest and best use for community? So how do we have this? How can we look at shared space? How can the community leverage these centers for learning and education in a different way, right? And I think that is a great conversation to have here. The courts, obviously, and then the policy piece with city and us around preservation of green space, open space, and what that potentially could look like. I would just add one other thing is, I do believe that the city also has a role when we talk about this issue of transportation for our most vulnerable. And so that should be a discussion, not only with just us and CMS and social services, but I think the city has to come on board so that we can better understand what resources that they can bring to the table as well. You have one more?
Yeah, I just, and I thought you were touching on it right there, but I was gonna bring in sort of the larger conversation around transit and just the bubbling up of transit.
Yeah.
And, you know, whether it's, you know, light rail, CATS, whatever, the whole sales tax increase, all of that seems like we should really be a little more engaged, I think, as an IGR
I agree.
on that. So.
That's spot on. So I think we've got some heavy, meaty topics. Obviously, a lot of this is policy driven and policy oriented, exactly, again, where I want this committee to go. And we all want the committee to go. So I think you guys have captured those topics and we can kind of set forth that agenda. But just so the public really understands that there will be those collaborative meetings, and not meeting just to meet, right? But with our city colleagues, with CMS, or where all three entities are around this body, along with our delegation representatives as well. So anything else? All right, Starla, did you want to go back to the first agenda item, or are you guys ready, or?
Have one more thing to add. I'm not sure,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if you wanted to, I think that was the agenda at the end of the formal agenda. I have my agenda in front of me.
Well, what
But
we
I don't know
can
if you
do.
wanted to talk about NACO or the process. Or
Well, I was going to say, Commissioner
one
Rodriguez McDowell, can you tell us what you have a conflict, and we need to see if we can get an alternative date so we can tackle that real quick.
Yeah, well, I mean, and it's for serving on the MEAC committee for CMS, and their scheduled time is the same time as this. And so I had to decline their meeting invitation today. And so I felt really bad that I had to do that, but I was committed to this process first and foremost. But I think it's important for us to collaborate, and especially as, you know, someone who represents the 3 southern towns, you know, in addition to portions of Charlotte, I really feel like I want to be a part of that committee. And so I don't think they're going to change their date for me. I was hoping you guys might. So.
What do you think, Myra?
It depends on the, you know, like we have to look at, I'm fine changing whatever works.
Are we a once a month committee? I can't keep it
Yeah,
straight.
we're once a month.
So
Yeah.
could we be a different Thursday, like the 1st or the 4th or the 3rd or whatever, you know, as opposed to the 2nd?
I'm okay with that.
Or just the
And
first?
I'm not married to Thursdays either. I just wanted to not all be crammed in on the
On a Tuesday.
Tuesdays.
Thank you
and
for
just spread
that.
it out a little bit. So,
Thursdays are generally fine.
I
So,
mean,
yeah.
if we can, again, and you know, not to put any extra work on you guys, Derek, but if it's all right to change our weekly.
We'd be happy to look at some potential recurring data options that may make the most sense and bring that back to you.
Okay. And then just one more thing on the schedule.
Sure.
And just to be really quite serious about the legislative breakfast. I know that I don't know, I don't have visibility into how dates are arrived at, but I really think that having commissioners, if we're sort of initiating this, and to not have multiple commissioners present, that is a real, I just feel like if we're not going to even schedule it around our own board being able to be there, then, you know, that's a big, I have a big problem with that. Because if, I just don't know why are we putting it out there to others when we haven't even confirmed it for our own board? So I don't have visibility into how we do that. So I protest.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a quick comment about some of the ideas that were recommended?
Please.
First, we appreciate all those really good ideas. I think we'd love to, I know we don't have much time today, but I think at some point maybe we could come back with some more options about how to, you know, refine that, actually put a concrete agenda on the table. As you noted, the board will be meeting with CMS at some point next month. And that's the opportunity in which the boards will come back together. And I think probably as a part of that agenda, continue to identify the topics in which the boards want to continue engaging in collaboration and in discussions. So I think as you talk about potential issues to work with CMS, that meeting is also an opportunity to identify what the boards want to continue talking about. That may help frame a continued, discussions around this committee about how you will continue to look at those issues with CMS. Just flagging that you will have an opportunity to talk with them as a board about your priorities together, and that would be a good opportunity to kind of lock in those areas in which you think are most critical between both boards. And then lastly, I think there was a comment about the school bonds. I know obviously it's an important topic. I know that you will have 2 meetings in upcoming for the full board to hear about the bonds. So I think that'll be in April and I think March, late March. So I want to make sure that you just remind you have those 2 opportunities. And I'm not sure how many different opportunities that we'll have with different groups of the board to hear more information than the full board may hear. So I want to be careful about how we talk about all those projects collectively, because we want to be uniform in the information that the board receives so that when you do vote on the full CIP, that everyone has the same information, same knowledge about all the projects that we're putting forward. But just reminding you, you will have 2 more opportunities to hear about all the CIP projects as a full board.
Well, maybe, so certainly thank you for that, Derek. And I think going back to, and not speaking for Commissioner Meyer, but, there may be an element that we want to tackle that's related to the bonds more so. So why don't we flush that out a little bit more? To your point, I mean, we don't want to get out ahead of our colleagues and have different bits of information floating around that they don't have. But it's similar to when we were in the retreat, we're getting kind of texts and information about responses to certain piece of information that was out there too, right? So being able to provide a setting for some of our colleagues to maybe address some of the things that they would like us to tee up, I think it's in bounds for this committee to say, okay, here's some information, colleagues, that we had, the chair of the school board came in, wanted to maybe tackle this issue, or, wanted us to make sure that we had visibility in more of an elongated setting than a 3-minute here, 3-minute there, staff presentation or something like that. So I'm not saying that's the way to approach it. I'm just saying that might be a way to approach it. But thank you for that. I think you're spot on. So we'll definitely make sure that we're mindful of how we navigate. Yes, sir. Yeah, that's okay. So what do you guys think about that, though? I mean,
Yeah,
I didn't get any texts.
from Elise?
You
Okay.
didn't what? Not around the bond. But, anything
Well,
like
she
that.
was able, well, it might have just been me because she was providing some clarity around,
Oh, okay.
she was providing some clarity. So- Which was cool. Oh, no. I'm sorry, I just meant. So just so everybody knows, we're just kind of working on some of the suggestions that were made to see if we can get the language that's. Okay, great. So Starla sent it and it's about to see the finished product.
Mr. Chairman, do you need to have agreement with the committee to extend the time of the meeting since we're
Yeah, we
officially
do.
scheduled to end at 2:30?
I'll entertain a motion to extend the time 15 minutes.
So
so
moved.
moved. Second?
All right, move properly second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, this is real time, typos and all, probably. And I've tracked changes, so it's going to look a little,
We're not gonna let the perfect be the enemy of the good, okay? So you're good to go.
and so we can certainly, I'll have it up here to wordsmith as you're all talking through it. Carly's going to pull it up once the cyber world gets it to her. Yes, there you go.
Not kidding.
I think there's one component that may be missing that I need to add at the bottom under environment, but this is a good amount for us to work with. So under the first, oh, is it showing track changes? No. Or it may just be showing the end result. If so, I'll talk through it. That way we can.
Yeah, it's not letting me.
Okay, it's not going to show the track changes. Okay, we'll talk through it. It actually shows the changes. So under education, I changed up it before it said support eliminating use of county tiers created for economic programs. You all have the originals in your hard copies. So it now says or proposes support funding for education that is not solely based on economic development tiers and that recognizes the needs of rural and urban counties.
That's great. That's great. I like it. I love that.
Why don't we just make sure we take agreement line by line? That way we can knock it out. And I think we all agree on that one, right?
Check. Okay.
Check.
Okay, and the second one, support fully funding the Leandra court order comprehensive remedial plan without supplanting existing funding measures.
Exclamation point.
Support raising income eligibility thresholds and reimbursement rates for the MC pre-K program to align with changes in wages, labor force demands, and cost of living.
Yes.
Okay. And this one, it's still kind of in progress. And I shared with the chairman that it was a little bit of a typo because Charlie, my counterpart with CMS, and I had been talking about this issue in Dr. Washington. So their language was not the latest language that we had talked about. So this may be a little more, but basically advocate for ways to address the shortage of, it should be shortage of school nurses or school nurse vacancies.
Yeah.
I can say school nurse vacancies.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I'll add it on mine. Okay.
I have a question because I know we hadn't had a chance
Yeah, you and I haven't
to
talked
speak about it. I know the county manager and Anthony Trotman and Raynard obviously have the goal to address school nurse vacancies. That's something that we're doing every day. I know that there have been discussions about how to do this, whether we need legislation or on our own. But just to confirm with you, Starla, based on the latest discussions, what do you think? What do you intending when that language is put forward? Are you suggesting the state needs to change potentially their criteria for school nurses?
So the conversation that we had that Raynard was a part of, because he is concerned, of course, about scope of practice and I'll be scope of practice. So what they're licensed, from teaching, exactly what they're licensed to do. I'm gonna be very transparent with you all to say that this is a big, big mountain to change scope of practice. It is a conversation that actually goes into Medicaid expansion and certificate of need. It is a really, while we're talking about school nurses, whenever you bring scope of practice to the table, it opens up a lot of other discussions and opposition among current nurses, and state law right now is in place requiring what's required in a school. And we know that because of the vacancies and the challenges with labor and workforce, that we'd rather have a medical personnel of some type. I understand parents and they need to have a medical personnel there. However, we're also from Dr. Washington, again, only to paraphrase and not speak for him, but his charge to make sure that appropriately by law certified and licensed members of healthcare staff are the ones administering. So there just has to be a bridge there. And so in the conversation that we had, to answer Derek's question for clarification, it was that we would continue to be partners to take a creative look at the conversation, to continue the conversation about how we could address this and what impact, and making sure that there aren't any unintended consequences to looking at what could or could not be change of scope of practice. So I'm open to adding to, certainly, and the board will discuss it some more at the meeting next week, but advocate for ways to address school nurse vacancies. And I think initially, when Charles and I were talking, it was just kind of address school nurse vacancies, but that's the thought behind it, to be willing to have the conversation. We're saying we agree that it's a priority.
To be candid, me personally, I'm just not aware of where we ultimately want to go with this, in the sense that I know we're still having internal discussions. Putting on the agenda right now, I just can't speak to say that we're in a unified voice about what we even want to see. So I'm just a little bit concerned about putting that on our official agenda before we've had time to analyze what we mean by this or what we may actually want to seek from this. So just a note of caution that I'm not saying we won't ultimately get there, but at this moment, I'm not sure we have a unified position on how to address this with our state partners, which could get a little bit, I don't know how helpful it would be to advocate for this without us having an internal position at this time.
So
When does this go to the full board? Or,
the 8th.
The 8th.
oh, really?
So I guess I think the language is so broad. I guess I'm just disconnected on why we wouldn't be able to take a position. Like I don't understand it, because if CMS can put it on their agenda, obviously, this is a critical area for our most vulnerable. I guess I don't understand why having language that says advocating for ways to address school nurse vacancies would be a place where there would be disconnection internally. And maybe you can shed a little light on that.
Well, I'll just be clear, I'm talking about myself. I'm not fully aware of the conversations that the county manager and deputy county manager Trotman have had. I think certainly we know we are doing all we can to, support school nurses and have them, fully get them hired on board.
Yeah.
By putting it on a legislative agenda, we're saying that there's some type of legislative action that we're putting forward to support this area. We haven't defined what that legislative action
Well,
is.
what
at
if
this
we
time.
use the language, since obviously there is a legislative mechanism to it, or CMS wouldn't be putting it on their legislative agenda, right? So in my opinion, so what if is it plausible to consider saying support our school system in their efforts to advocate for school nurse vacancies or
That's
something
where
to
I'll
that?
chime in and say, because of the conversation and the concerns that Dr. Washington expressed, to automatically link agreeing with CMS's position on how to address the vacancies may not align with his recommendations from a healthcare professional perspective. Again, not speaking for him, but they may not align based on my understanding of his concerns about changing the licensing or certification criteria for the staff, the healthcare staff person that is officially in a school to provide healthcare to students. And so that's why, again, the broad language, and I did maybe change ways to advocate for solutions to address school nurses, but recognizing Derek's point that the change would be the change from CMS's perspective would be to seek a change in the licensing or certification requirements for school nurses. That is not something that our public health director expressed 100% comfort with doing.
I think I really hear you guys on that. And I think that it's just like people that come to us and say, why can't you just fill in the blank? And it's like, well, because there's all this other stuff that you don't know, and I feel like we're at a place where we're sort of half baked. We really want this outcome, but we don't know all the ramifications. And if we don't know exactly what we're advocating for, but I do hear what you're saying, Mr. Chairman, that, there's gotta be language around it that's already in process, but I do feel like, I feel the caution of not supporting Reynard or Dr. Washington and his, expertise in this area. That feels a little weird to me.
Is CMS specifically saying, talking about licensure, RN to LPN, is that specific for them?
I can't speak to how specific, just that they wanted to, they see addressing or taking a look at what the requirements are as a possible avenue to address the vacancies.
And I also wouldn't want to disrespect nurses who are licensed and, like I could see how this could be a whole big tricky thing where we would really need the visibility around the ramifications of our actions.
Well, this isn't a living document, so what we could do is we can commit to come back, look at this issue further, come back later to IGR, maybe talk about it at some point when we have more details about what we think it would take. And then you could decide at that point whether to amend or not this agenda. That would be one way to get you more.
Yeah, and I think that's fair based on the feedback of my colleagues. Obviously, I'm in the minority here, which is fine because I certainly respect where you guys are coming from, but I would say this. I personally don't see the ambiguity. I don't see the slippery slope, but that's just my particular lens with respect to where everybody else is going with it. And even respecting where you guys are coming from. I don't see, and I'll say this and just be quiet and we can move on. We'll take it off because again, there's no need to beat a dead horse. But essentially, we would rather have teachers and administrators taking care of children in school than an LPN. Like,
Right. It
I'll
doesn't make
never
any sense.
understand that, but nonetheless,
It's true.
we are, and it's not a disrespect, with all due respect, to an RN, right? We're not saying that, you know, you don't have a higher level of credential.
We just don't have enough of them.
We're just saying that we have vacancies, so we want, I guess, administrative staff to continue to take care of stomach aches and everything else that's going on and whatever. So nonetheless, will we agree to just maybe revisit this at a later date? And if we have to add it after because your point is very fair about getting more information.
Well, the horse isn't dead yet. You know, we can keep beating this horse. I mean, I think there's more room because I really agree with what you're saying. You know, definitely if there's already, you know, moms and dads and administrators and people who aren't nurses administering, you know.
Well, I guess what I'm saying, if I'm in a school that doesn't have a nurse and I'm a kid, I'm 7 years old, you're my teacher, who do I go to say, my tummy hurts? And who at that point is responsible? Do we have nurses coming from another school? Why don't we do this for the sake of what you're saying, right? We can take this off, table it, give them back and get more information to your point, Derek. If we want to add it at a later date, let's go ahead and add it because your points are very valid and fair. And I think I'm definitely coming from more of an emotional point and I don't want to do that. So let's go ahead and move on with that, Starla.
Okay, my computer slowed down. So I think we're on. Like we're okay with education. So we're done with education. We'll move on to health and human, if everyone's okay with the
Yes.
around NC pre-K and all that. Okay.
Yep.
Health and human services with Medicaid expansion. The second one, support funding and policies that address housing security, such as access to affordable housing, examining the impact of investor-owned properties, and increasing the Homestead Act threshold to support older adults aging in place.
The only thing is on that one, why don't we say the corporate, well, I mean, why are we using the language of investor and not corporate landlord or?
In the research, we found that it's been used interchangeably for different reports and different ways of looking at things. Certainly, when you think of corporate, there is a bill in Congress now that would limit corporations from having more than 100 properties in the country, or they would be fined. Then you have smaller communities where there are smaller, they're, you know, local landlords that have 10 or 15 properties. They're not a corporation, but so it's just been interchangeable.
Investor,
Certainly,
though, is a catch-all that would include the larger and some of the small. Okay, I'm with that.
Mr. Chairman, move to extend our meeting to 3 p.m. It's
Second.
2:45.
Dang, sorry. All right, it's moving properly. Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
okay. Our next, any other changes to that one, Mr. Chairman?
We're good. We're golden.
Support immigration policies that address needs of immigrant families, as well as strengthen our economy and workforce. I know I'll pause here to say that CMS did include some similar language in their policy related to our conversations, and the city has language in theirs. The city's language is specific to visas and supporting resettlement agencies. Ours has a broader approach.
That's good.
We'll keep moving. Support funding and policies addressing increased access to care, including primary and behavioral health, early childhood development, and federally qualified health centers.
Absolutely.
You all are good on that one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Here it's been moved, there it is. Advocate for policies and increase resources that assist initiatives related to reducing community violence and increasing public safety. So we moved that from the community up to there.
Yes. Check.
Perfect.
Right. So the next change is taking environment, separating it from community, And under community, support funding and policies that promote attracting and retaining a talented workforce and increase workforce development opportunities.
Yes.
Okay.
The next is a new item. We talked with Sonia Harper. If Sonia's listening, thank you. Thank you to so many of the staff members that have been our phone a lifeline this afternoon, and for everyone's patience.
Look at that, man.
The next one is to support, increase, and we'll wordsmith it if there's some
Sure.
grammatical errors, but support increase in funding to the judicial branch that will allow for local jurisdictions to expand staffing capacity to align with staff to caseload ratios as recommended by national court practice standards.
Amen.
I love it.
Mhm.
Right. To the next bullet, or the next item, is the separation of the environment category. And I want to ask you to bear with me because I've typed some more since what you've seen on the screen. The first one is support local control over stormwater mitigation and repeal state laws restricting guidelines on redevelopment projects.
Absolutely.
I will say, this has been an issue. We've partnered in the past with the Catawba Riverkeepers Foundation, or when we were working on the Lake Island Marine Commission, which is not on the agenda, just by the way, because we still need to do some local collaborative work. So I have not recommended that to be on the agenda, but we haven't had a chance to meet with Ryan Carter and the folks over there yet, because we've been in this process before being able to participate. And so I've borrowed some of language from their advocacy efforts and just conversations. And Aaron, thank you for also sending over your information. You haven't seen this bullet, so we'll make sure that you may need to wordsmith that some. Send me a text if you do. And so do you all have any edits to that new one? Okay. The next one, of course, is the orphan road language. The following, I may need to read this. Yes. So I'll be reading because that's not my update there.
So that would go in community instead of in environment,
So these are all environment, which,
even the orphan roads?
oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I can put orphan roads under, which way would you like? It could go under
The
I think
community.
it would
Community.
go into community.
Yeah,
but I agree
community
with
makes sense.
community.
Yep.
We'll put it under community. Did I leave out something? Okay. And I know Carly is amazing over there and she's helping with us tracking, but I'll try and do it in real time for us. So I have the latest document as well. Okay, so our next one. Okay, and this is thanks with Aaron, and I wordsmith some of what Aaron sent over from the action plan. Support funding and policies tackling needs addressed in the environmental action plan, such as future pollution reduction, resource conservation, solid waste, and climate preparedness initiatives. Again, that's not up there.
Yep.
Sure,
Yeah, that's
sure.
fine.
We're okay.
Great. The next one would be support equal protection and enforcement of environmental laws and regulations, including using a racial equity lens when implementing actions and during environmental decision-making.
Love it.
Yes.
Again, this
Yeah.
is language
Yes.
that
Yeah,
is-
there we
I
go.
just cut down a little bit of what she had, but this is language
Sure.
that came over from Aaron. The next would be, and this is just a short one because you all spoke to putting something about digital inclusion or broadband, which I don't have a specific, because we know, number one, there are some collaborative efforts around ARPA funding that are happening. The governor has some of the grants that are coming down. If I were to make a recommendation just to you all, I don't think that necessarily has to be spelled out, but because those are still all in play and being executed. But if it's something you want to make sure is highlighted, I just have a sentence here that says support policies and funding that advance digital inclusion and access to technology.
Should that be in community?
Yeah, I would say community.
But it
on
can go under
that.
community. Yes, I was drafting and so I can. Dear, I was like, where'd you get that language? I'm not sure. Actually, just to be very, very fair, because it's just been an amazing collaborative process this year with all of our partners. I serve as an ex officio member of the Charlotte Business Alliance's advocacy committee, and they really took a lot of our feedback. The county manager gave feedback, I gave feedback, I know Tanya said she gave feedback into their overall legislative agenda, and this is some of the language out of their agenda. So another aligned
Okay.
item. Thank you very much, Joe Boss and and the team there at the Charlotte Business Alliance. And they have information about affordable housing and Medicaid expansion, all that's in theirs, as well as workforce development that we gave them input on. So that is where that language, we'll put that under community. Is that what I heard?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, and then the final one is something that I also heard, Mr. Chairman, you speak to transportation. And so to be consistent with our language and our work around transportation, I went back to the resolution that was passed by the board and pulled that language very quickly. And it says, support the regulatory definition of transportation that includes an active multimodal transportation network such as shared use paths, greenways, trails, protected bike and pedestrian lanes, sidewalks, and public transit.
Very good.
Excellent.
That's awesome.
Awesome, awesome.
I feel like we should apologize.
Team, if I could, well, I think it's just great work and kudos to our amazing staff for being able to operate on the fly. If I could just ask one other thing, get committee feedback. Is there a way to identify where there's cross collaboration across agendas?
Yes, I think that would be fairly easy. Do you want it indicated on the sheet itself or designated?
like a
anywhere?
little- like an asterisk, like an
Maybe
asterisk or something, yeah.
I mean, just to say that, this is, maybe like one asterisk is us and CMS and two asterisks is all three, or,
Okay.
something similar to, I don't,
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Based on the time frame, we'll be able to do that with the Charlotte Business Alliance, with CMS, and possibly if, I'm not sure what other organizations, stakeholders, I want to speak for them, but our two elected boards, those are the two, not elected, but Charlotte Business Alliance and CMS have completed their legislative agenda. The city will not complete theirs until after our meeting next week.
oh.
And
well,
so-
then we can't. But I mean, to Derek's point earlier, we can always go back.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's just important for us to create a document when the community views it at some point that they can see, okay, these are, the shared effort, so to speak.
And I think the symbols and the kind of the key at the bottom is a really nice and easy approach
Yeah.
to change and to add, because as we know, like ours may be a living document and have some changes that'll make it easy on the staff side.
Yeah,
And for
yeah.
folks to
Instead of
understand.
asterisks, maybe icons that each of the entities uses, like, the crown or the whatever,
Or the- yeah,
the little
CMS
icon is.
Apple.
Whatever it is.
Whatever it is.
Whatever it is,
We'll learn.
So I think that, hold on, we've got something from Chris. Can you read that, Carly, please?
Yeah, she said the Central Lina Regional Council legislative agenda may also be considered for alignment.
Thank you for that. I think that really concludes our agenda. Thank you, everybody, for your patience and your input.
Yes.
Do we have anything else?
You have to actually approve it.
Oh,
Oh.
okay. Really? We did all that work. We didn't.
And I can just accept changes and we can throw it up there real quick if you'd like to, or if you're comfortable hearing what you've heard, that's fine too.
Well, does anybody make a motion to
motion to
approve with the
approve.
changes?
The changes.
Second? So it's been moved and properly second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, ayes have it.
Thank you.
Now, can we?
Move to adjourn.
Now we're good.
Second.
All right, thank you, everybody. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Good job.
That was fun.